and welcome to our final chapter, friendship and social support. Let's get started with this very interesting subject matter. All right, so first off, how do we find friends? This is a really important question, especially post COVID. A lot of people have been having difficulty finding friends after COVID, but I feel like it's been a chronic issue for a long time in our modern sort of 20th century, 21st century world. People have had difficulty finding friends, especially in adulthood. So, where do we find friends? Well, a lot of times we can find friends in activities that we enjoy doing, and we find other people who also enjoy those activities. That's a great place to find friends. So, a lot of times people will make friends in college, or people will make friends on a sports team, or people will make friends by joining a hiking group or a book club or something like that. People who share our activities are more likely to become friends. When you were little, this probably was pretty common for you to be engaged in some kind of activity. Here, these kids have been sent to summer camp, and so they're all at the same camp. And so they probably enjoy similar things. They like the things that are at the camp, and that's why they're there. And so that's the basis for a friendship. Um, a lot of times, common activities give us the opportunity to provide support to each other, right? Encourage each other as we're striving towards something, or give each other a literal boost, like the kids in this meme are doing. Um, Being able to lend a hand is part of friendship. And so sharing common activities makes it more likely that we're going to be able to provide support to each other. Affection is a really big important aspect of friendship, and a lot of times that comes from being helpful to each other, and then we start to trust or feel warmly towards each other, and then we start to show affection towards each other, either verbally or like these kids with their arms around each other and like that. So affection, support, these are all factors that may emerge naturally from sharing the same activities. Propinquity is another one that is really important. Propinquity is a word I love. I didn't have to use that particular word, but in child development, it's a common term for what you probably would call proximity, right? Like being near each other, having access to each other. When you have propinquity, when you have access to each other, it's more likely that a friendship will develop. And so, living in the same neighborhood, going to the same school, attending the same gym, right? This gives us the opportunity to experience what's called the mere exposure effect, where just by being around each other, we start to develop affection and we have opportunities for support and we have the opportunity to actually get to know each other. So, just being around each other is a really important factor. This is not to say that you can't have friends that are far flung, but probably those far flung friends are ones who share an activity with you or who you have already developed a friendship when they moved or something like that. So propinquity is just really super important in that development stage for making friends. Physical characteristics is another factor that helps to determine who will become our friends and who will not. And so a lot of times people who share fairly unimportant to their personality or to their worthiness as a friend, characteristics will tend to gravitate towards each other. So females tend to gravitate toward female friends, and males tend to gravitate towards male friends on average. People of the same basic age tend to gravitate towards each other as friends. People who share the same race, people who share the same religion, people who share things that they can sort of look at each other and say, that's a member of my in group. That's a person who probably will get me better than people who aren't part of my in group. So when we talk about physical characteristics, it's sort of one of those opportunities to sort of assess whether we might have something in common just by looking at someone when we really don't have any other information to help us to decide. A study just came out about a week ago, and I haven't had a chance to update it into my slides, but it claims that people tend to have friends that are basically of their same level of attractiveness. Maybe, maybe not, but that's a new study that came out. So I thought I'd throw that in. Maybe sharing that as a characteristic would be an important factor in determining who we gravitate towards as potential friends. So, when we talk about children and friendships, it's kind of interesting to talk about factors that are common among kids who tend to be popular with their peers versus kids who tend not to be popular with their kids, maybe even marginalized by other kids. Popular kids tend to talk more, but I don't mean in a dominating the conversation way. They are maybe a little bit better at sort of small talk. They're able to engage with what maybe their peer wants to talk about. They give proper responses to that. In moments of silence, they can think of something to talk about to start the conversation. They take turns directing and following. So a child who's popular tends to be one who, if the other person has a good idea, they'll follow that. If no good ideas are emerging, they'll offer one. So they're willing to lead and to follow. You've probably known kids who only will lead, and you've probably known kids who only would follow. And if you're a natural born leader, you might love having followers around, right? Like there's nothing wrong with having somebody who's willing to, um, sort of go along with whatever great plans you have. But in general, if you're talking about kids who get along with lots of different kids, it tends to be those who are willing to sometimes be a leader and willing to sometimes be a follower. They tend to smile more. Kids who have lots of different peers who think of them well, I'm not necessarily saying that they're friends with all of these other peers, but peers who will rate them as somebody who they like, tend to smile more. And so smiling seems to be one of those things that sort of is welcoming, makes the other person feel comfortable. And so we see that more among children who are rated as popular among their peers. They're more likely to offer help to somebody who needs help. Do you need me to help you lift that? Do you want me to put that in your backpack for you? These kinds of things are more often done by the kinds of kids that other kids tend to like. And they're more likely to share. They're more likely to give somebody else a turn on the swing, or they're more like and recognize that a line is forming and that maybe somebody else would like to take a turn. So kids who are rated as more popular by their peers tend to be more willing to take a turn at things. Unpopular kids, kids who are rated more down towards the bottom of the list as far as the peers in the class who are popular or not, they tend to fight more, whether it's arguing or actual physical fighting. They are more likely to stand on the sidelines, hoping to be invited in, and less likely to just sort of initiate, hey, can I play? So they tend to stand on the sidelines, hoping to be noticed, and a lot of times other kids don't notice them. And so then they internalize that, well, nobody likes me, I'm not included. Kids are more likely who do initiate, hey, can I play? They're more likely to have that overture rejected if they tend to be disruptive in general. If they are the one who like takes the ball and wants to do something else, or hey, come chase me, and runs off, and the other kids are like, we were doing something, we don't want to come chase you, right? So if they're being disruptive to what the other kids are already doing, if they behave aggressively, in general, the other kids tend to reject their overtures towards playing and being friends. They tend to get ignored, just sort of like nobody notices them if they're really shy. And if you grew up a shy kid, you know this is true. Other kids a lot of times just don't even notice you. They sort of, unless you can initiate, a lot of times you don't get noticed by your peers. And then withdrawn, which is different from shy. Withdrawn is where maybe you've been standing on the sidelines, nobody's noticed you, and this is a common pattern. And so you start to just go, never mind, I'll just turn within myself. I won't look at anyone else. I won't make eye contact. I'm not going to smile at anyone. And so you become more withdrawn. And so kids oftentimes will be just like not even noticing that that withdrawn child is sort of hoping to be included into the game, but they don't know how. So unpopular kids tend to have some consistent, sort of disruptive and aggressive components. I don't know how to initiate and get involved with the group. I would like to get involved with the group, but I don't know how. So really common patterns. Now, when we're ignored, it can have really big effects. I'm going to go ahead and run this video in here instead of trying to link it because it's pretty brief, and so might as well just run it here. Really interesting experiment that's depicted. Let me turn off. I can't. Oh, I see why. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Let me put the audio on and my audio off.
I think the most unexpected kind of pain that any professional athlete, and especially a football player, is likely to feel when they lose the game is the loss of connection to the other players, their organization, and then probably the fan base. You don't realize how much that's contributing to your well being. Even though social pain almost seems like a metaphorical kind of pain, the brain doesn't seem to treat it as a metaphor at all. It treats it as a basic way that we respond to the world. We've done a lot of work looking at the relationship between social pain and physical pain. We bring folks into the scanning facility and we tell them that they're going to control this little hand at the bottom of the screen here. And they believe they're playing a ball tossing game with two other folks who are also in scanners. And they're just playing this silly little game. And then after about a minute, the game changes. And what's important about the change here is that the other two players stop throwing the ball to the hand at the bottom of the screen. And that hand at the bottom of the screen, the real player, never gets the ball thrown to them ever again. And so this is a way for us to introduce a rejection experience to people who are laying all alone inside an MRI scanner. And so then we're able to look at their brain while they're being left out of the game compared to when they were included in the game. And when we do this, we see two things that are fascinating. The first thing is that the brain regions that we know are central to registering the distress of physical pain, whether it's a stomach ache or arthritis or a broken leg, these regions are going to register that pain. And what we found is that very selectively, those same brain regions tend to become much more active when people were left out of the game compared to when they were included in the game. And so this suggests that the brain is responding in a way that's similar to social pain as it ordinarily would to physical pain. And the physical ailments are real, but I think that the kind of social pain that they might experience from being cut off from these people that have meant so much to them for so many years, I think that's probably going to be one of the hardest and most unexpected kinds of distress they feel.
All right, so that's actually from a documentary that's covering how professional athletes adjust when they return to, when they retire. Um, so that's why they're sort of referring to football players and they're referring to, playing and stuff. But boy, imagine if you're a small child and you're metaphorically that little hand at the bottom wanting to be included in the game, and the other two kids are just not even noticing. Imagine what that does to sort of your pain receptors in your brain and the way that you internalize your sense of self and your value and things like that. A lot of times people say, oh, kids are awful, kids are mean. I'm not sure that kids are awful and kids are mean. I don't know if that's true. Kids are self absorbed. Kids are worried about what is happening to them. And so the two who are playing, for example, are not thinking, oh, good, let's marginalize the kid who's standing on the side. They're just not even noticing, probably 90% of the time. They literally don't notice. But as the kid who's not being noticed, it doesn't matter what the motivation is. I'm just not being noticed and I'm not being included. So you can imagine that this is, if this is a physical pain for an adult who's just being, lying in an MRI and being left out of a little cartoon game, you can imagine what it must feel like as an actual child who's developing your sense of self and your personality and being marginalized like that. So I'm trying to think of a smooth way to transition into this coping with anger issue. Um, because being left out doesn't necessarily make children angry, but sometimes all of us go through periods where we're angry, right? And we're frustrated or we would like to do something about how we're feeling, right? There are differences in how popular kids tend to handle anger versus unpopular kids. Um, in general, popular kids tend to cope well with that kind of frustrating, sort of red emotion that makes them, angry feeling. They tend to be more direct in dealing with their anger. They may say something like, that's not fair, or you're cheating, or it's my turn, or something like that. They're more direct about what's happening, and they tend to be more active in dealing with whatever is the anger inducing stimulus. Whatever is causing them to feel angry, they're more likely to try and rectify that. As a result of that, by verbalizing it and not just grabbing the ball back or pushing the other kid down or something, but instead verbalizing, "Hey, it's my turn," or "I'm going to tell." Like that's a terrible thing that we were all taught not to do, but saying "I'm going to tell that you're not being fair" is actually a direct thing to deal with. That tends to minimize conflicts in general. If you have a kid who expresses how they're feeling, it also allows them to maintain relationships because when you say that's not fair or it's my turn, the other person has face saving ways to cope with that feedback. They can say, "Oh, I forgot, I didn't know," or, "I didn't mean to," or something like that. They can save face, still maintain the relationship, and at the same time help their friend not to be angry with them. And so it's actually a really effective coping strategy. Now, popular boys in particular, on average, do express their anger, but they resist actions when they're being provoked, right? So if they have a peer who's taunting them or trying to bully them or is teasing them, popular boys are less likely to take the bait. They're less likely to do what the other kid wants them to do. And that may have something to do with self-esteem. If you're a popular boy, you might be more equipped to say, I don't have to do what you're asking me to do. I don't have to react the way that you're wanting me to react because I have enough self-confidence not to. With girls, when they are angry, the popular girls tend to express disapproval, right? They are more, the examples I gave might be a reflection of my sex more than anything else. That's not fair, right? I'm going to tell. These are things that popular girls tend to do to manage anger-inducing situations. Again, it gives their peers like a way out. Unpopular kids are more likely to hit other kids. They're more likely to actually tattle, right? Go tell the adults rather than trying to deal with it themselves. You'll notice what I said is "I'm gonna tell." That gives the other kid the opportunity to go, "No, no, no, let me fix it." Unpopular kids are more likely to actually tattle, and so then they oftentimes get labeled as a tattle or as a teacher's pet or something like that. Unpopular kids, when they're angry, are more likely to just go ahead and take the toy that they want. Just tear it out of the other kid's hand or kick it out of their hands or whatever. Like take it, right? So they may actually escalate into kind of more bullying behavior, right? Unpopular kids who are angry are more likely to take it out on weaker kids, which is what we call bullying. So when they're angry, we can kind of see some differences between them. We can kind of see some differences in the parenting of popular kids versus unpopular kids. Um, Popular kids tend to have a warm, positive relationship with their parents in general, and that's even through adolescence. A lot of times, people think there has to be storming and tumult between teenage kids and their parents, but that's not necessarily true. And in particular, popular kids don't seem to have that trouble as much. They tend to have had authoritative parents, but that might be the reason why they don't have as much trouble in adolescence with their parents, and why also they have more warm and positive relationship. Authoritative parents are ones who have, in little small bites throughout their child's life, given them the opportunity to make some of their own mistakes, make some of their own decisions, always ones that are sort of safe. And as they get older, the child feels more competent to make their own decisions. And so authoritative parenting is based on sort of the parent showing trust for their child's decision making capabilities. Um, Parents of popular children have spent time teaching their children to be cooperative. Like, kids aren't necessarily born willing to give up their toy for a period of time so somebody else can play, or to get in line and wait their turn on the swing or something. Like, they're not necessarily born that way. And so, but popular kids' parents took the time to teach them, well, this child also wants a turn. They also teach their children to be assertive and speak up for themselves, right? So they teach them to call out unfairness or unjustness or cruelty when they see it. Now, unpopular kids, we see certain things from their moms and certain things from their dads that may be linked to how they're behaving with their peers. Um, Unpopular kids oftentimes have mothers who lack confidence in their parenting style. And so those unconfident moms may be being unpredictable in their parenting. They may not be a good source of like consistency. They are not, you know, moms of unpopular children are not necessarily trying to teach their children to become independent. They may kind of like it that their kids at 8 and 10 and 15 years old are still heavily reliant on their parent, that they really need their parents for like every decision and everything that they do. So they're not necessarily trying to foster independent thought or trying to foster independence in general. And it might be because of things that are not being met for the mom. Fathers of unpopular children tend to be more neglectful than anything else. They don't pay very much attention to the rearing of the children, and may even look at it as like, well, that's women's work. Like my role is to earn money, and your role is to take care of kids, right? And so that tendency, that attitude, can be internalized by children as, my dad doesn't care, and so this may be part of like the beginning of them feeling rejected, right? And then their peers reject them, and then every place they're going, and it helps to foster that insecurity in them. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll talk in the next video about Erikson's stages of development and how they relate to this topic. Let's see if I can stop. Here we go.